So the past 2 weeks, we have been looking at our macronutrients, carbohydrates, and proteins, which forms part of our Nutrition 101 series that we started 2 weeks ago. And today brings us to our final macronutrient being fat. We will also still be focusing on our macronutrients in the upcoming weeks, but for today we will be focusing on fat. So we did this Nutrition 101 series mainly so that we can all be on the same page and so that we can all understand the basics of nutrition and really have that solid foundation in our day-to-day lives and our day-to-day nutrition. Because there's so much information out there and so many people with so many opinions, I think it's really important for you to be able to understand what is a carbohydrate, what is a fat, what is protein, why would you want to incorporate it into your diet, and how would you like to incorporate it into your diet. So I hope these videos are helpful, and hopefully today will also bring you some insight in terms of fat. Before we jump into the video, just a quick introduction. My name is Melissa Null. I'm a registered dietitian and I'm part of the Body 20 Nutrition Doctor team, and very welcome. If you've been following for a while or if you're new here, you're welcome to also send us any questions if you have any via WhatsApp or email. So looking at our last macronutrient being fat, it's important to notice the very first thing that I want to bring up is that fat is a very energy dense molecule. So looking back at carbohydrates and protein, we see that if we look at 1 gram of protein or carbohydrates, we see that it contains 4 calories, whereas fat contains 9 calories. So it's more than double the amount of calories. Now, we need to understand that this is something we need to keep in mind, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we should now all go on a no-fat diet, because fat is actually really important in our diet as well. We need to bring it in a balanced way. But if you are focusing on losing fat, for example, or losing weight, you need to be in a calorie deficit. And if you are consuming high-fat foods, this might be why you are struggling to lose weight, because your calorie intake might be higher than you really actually think it should be, or that you maybe think it is. So looking at, for example, the different types of fats, this is also really important because we really want to make sure that we are focusing on the right types of fats. So you've probably heard someone say healthy fats or omega-3s or those types of things, and that's really true. So we get 3 main different types of fats. We get saturated fat, unsaturated fat, and then we get trans fats. Now, saturated fat basically comes from your animal sources. So think of it as basically it solidifies when it's at room temperature. So you can think of if you fried the previous night and you put the choppies in the bowl or whatever, and the next morning you take it out of the fridge, the fat has solidified. Or think of butter, for example, and those types of things. So that's typically a saturated fat that we get mainly from our animal sources. The only plant source of saturated fat is coconut oil, actually. Now, saturated fat is something we do definitely incorporate into our diets, but we really actually want to try and keep it to a smaller percentage of our total fat intake. So generally, the recommendation is about 10% of our fat intake. So that's a bit of an arbitrary number. It's difficult to maybe just figure out in your day-to-day. So in general, if we can opt for our leaner cuts of meats that are lower in saturated fat, like our white meats, like for example chicken, and you opt for the breast instead of the thighs and those types of things, skip the skin, for example, because most of the fat also sits in the skin, opting for lean meats or extra lean mince, and those types of foods, that's also definitely going to help you. Whereas if you go for lamb or mutton, it's really high in fat, so your saturated fat intake is definitely going to increase. Now, I'm not saying that you're not allowed to eat lamb. I'm just saying that you want to maybe limit it to a smaller amount, or maybe not so regularly. Moving on to unsaturated fat. So this is where we want to capitalize on our fat intake. So this is where majority of our fat in our diet should actually be coming from. And this is from our plant sources, like for example, avo, nuts and seeds, and olive oil and olive and that type of thing. Now, these unsaturated fats also contain a very important nutrient called omega-3, and we need omega-3s especially for their great help in our brain health, basically making sure that we have a memory until hopefully when we die. It's also super important for reducing the inflammation in our bodies and so forth. So we definitely want to maybe make sure that we are getting in a variety of nuts and seeds and olive oil. We also do get omega-3 fats from our oily fish, like for example salmon, mackerel and sardines, which is also a great source of a leaner protein with a great fat content. So if you can incorporate fish into your diet, if you're not allergic, for example, then that's great. It can be tinned. It doesn't necessarily need to be fresh. I know it's really expensive. So if you can incorporate that, that'll be great. Lastly, we have our trans fats. So trans fats are the fats that we want to try and avoid as much as possible. Now, you'll probably see on a lot of products labels out there that it says trans fat free and the likes. And this is mainly because research has really shown that trans fats do really have a correlatory effect, or we can actually link it to increased risk for especially cancer, but a lot of other chronic diseases that we don't like. So trans fats typically are when unsaturated fats are put under high heat or high pressure, where they actually change their bonds from a cis bond to a trans bond, and that's when we get trans fat. So you can think of things that's been deep fried and maybe put under high heats and pressures, typically processed foods and so forth, often have a higher trans fat content. So we typically want to try and limit that. What's really interesting is, and I don't know if you've maybe noticed it, so let's say you do enjoy a slab chippy or a French fry from McDonald's or Steers or your local cafe, wherever you go. So I don't know if you've ever noticed, if sometimes the chips really, especially if you go to the same place, they sometimes taste really great, and then sometimes they have a bit of their flavor isn't all there. And that's mainly, we can see that when these chips get deep fried, every single time that oil gets heated up. Remember, they don't use fresh oil every single time. It's going to be way too expensive, and they use really poor quality oil as well to reduce the cost. So every single time this oil gets heated up, the fat molecules actually reduce their size. And then what's really interesting is that we see that those fat molecules actually penetrate the food a lot more effectively. So what happens is, if you get the fresh batch of chips in the morning, for example, where they've just heated the oil for the first time, you might feel like the chip doesn't have all that flavor, or it's, it just tastes a little bit different. But by the end of the day, you get this really amazing chip, maybe, for example, and that's mainly because it has a lot more oil and fat actually, in that chip compared to the one that's been made fresh or with fresh oil. Now, even though you think, well, lucky me if I get the nice oily chip, unfortunately, you're getting a lot of trans fats in that, because that oil has been heated up so many times and those bonds have been changed. So that's really increasing your risk for unhealthy behaviors, and also making you more susceptible for chronic diseases and cancers. So we do want to reduce that. So try and balance it out by not having it too regularly. Fast foods are, I know, delicious and convenient, but they are definitely not great for our health, and especially because of the fat content and the trans fat content in them. So the main takeaways that I want to say today is, if you are focusing on losing weight, you definitely need to make sure you're not having too high fat food. So I often see people where they say, but I'm eating healthy, I'm not losing weight. I don't eat fast foods. I don't eat unhealthy things. I only eat nuts and seeds and avo and those types of things. And that's great, because they have so many amazing nutrients, especially the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, which is super important for the body. And like I've mentioned, omega-3 and 6 and 9, which is great for brain health, inflammation, and all those things. But unfortunately, like I've mentioned in the beginning of the video, 1 gram of fat contains 9 calories. So if you're having handfuls of almonds for a snack, you might be pushing yourself over that calorie amount. And even though it's healthy, you're not going to see the results that you'd like. So make sure you are controlling your portions when it comes to the fat content of your diet, and where you can, opt for unsaturated fats as far as possible that hasn't been cooked or processed or changed up for too much. Try to keep it as simple as possible, and then hopefully you'll be able to balance out your diet in that way. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, you are very welcome to let us know, and then I'll see you in the next one.